What's up, incredible inkjetters? I'm Quacker's Co, and this is the fish fry for January 15th, being held at Sockeye Station. Our cookware for this rotation is the 52 gal, the big swig roller, the dually squelchers, and the goo tuber. Our DPS on this composition is sitting just a little bit low, so that goo tuber and the big swig are going to want to make sure they focus a little bit more on lessers. That way we're not getting overrun in the latter half of the wave. Keeping that big swig up on some of the platforms in the tower allows its attack to completely open up and cause as much damage to enemies as possible. But you need to be a little bit careful about causing damage to a scrapper and accidentally stunning it there by the shoreline. That goo tuber has a piercing shot, so make sure you swim jump it to wherever it needs to be. That way you can cause massive damage to as many enemies as possible. The 52 gal and the dually squelchers has some pretty good range to them, so no one player needs to focus supremely on one specific boss. Everybody can reach just about everything. The big swig roller is probably one of the worst weapons to use against a stinger, so if you see one, it's either best to ping this way or just use a special, that way you don't have to worry about it anymore. But the big swig is one of the best weapons for taking out a fish stick, and there's almost always a position here at Sockeye Station where you can hit the fish stick without having to climb it. The goo tuber will probably be the worst weapon for taking out fish sticks. Aiming on the right side of the rotation does help though. The tap shot of the goo tuber is strong enough to take out a single pot with every single shot, so the weapon actually does work pretty well on taking out a stinger. Just make sure you know what's spawning around you, make sure you have an opening to get in there, and an exit strategy to get out. And the big swig will also have a problem with taking out steelheads. So always try to be aware of what your big swig player is doing, because it's easy to find yourself getting bumped around when you just want to take out a single boss. Sockeye Station is a really big map. With the amount of distance between the basket and the shoreline, it's helpful to lure just about any target that can move closer to the basket at the beginning of the wave. As long as we keep the field clear of lessers, 1 or 2 priority targets doesn't cause too much of a problem. Once you get high enough in hazards though, the lessers will spawn just a little too frequently, making it so that it's a little bit hard to deal with bosses and lessers at the same time. In the second half of the wave, it's always helpful to make sure that you deal with steel eels and steelheads before they get too close to the basket. The ability to block damage, and the amount of time and observance it takes to see a steelhead activate his bomb and take it out can be a bit of a problem when things are getting crazy. Salmon are also in this category too. Luckily we have the tower so we can deal with them without having to activate them, but if we're not paying attention to them, they'll start dropping so many lessers. So just like steelheads and steel eels, in the second half of the match, Salmonids need to be dealt with quickly. For priority targets like big shots, stingers, and flyfish, teamwork is always going to be really helpful, but you need to get back to the basket or the tower as quick as possible. Be careful about what you're stunning there on the shoreline and what your instincts will tell you to do. It's really easy to just throw that bomb into a Moz's mouth, and then the only way that those eggs will ever be delivered to the basket is if a snatcher comes down, grabs them, and brings them right to you. So keep an eye on where the snatchers are spawning on this map. There's spots right by the basket, and they're super duper helpful on getting some of those extra eggs in case the boss spawning RNG is just pushing nothing but prio targets. As always, try to get to that quota with more than 20 seconds left. That way you can spend your time and focus on taking out enemies and staying alive. So one of the best strategies I think that works for Sockeye Station is for the good turf coverage weapon like the big swig to just start painting around the basket as much as possible. Even that little round wall around the basket is super helpful for getting painted. As long as someone's focusing on that, every other weapon can rush to the outside of the tower wall and get as much painted as they move their way back towards the basket. Just be careful about staying there on the shoreline as soon as the match starts. A flipper flopper is one of the best early bosses that you can get. It's a super duper easy boss to lure to the basket, and if you have all hands on deck right at the beginning, it's easy to cover that spot and all the eggs get put in instantly. And remember, even those extra seconds it takes for you to get your ink back to throw that egg is time that you could be spending dealing some kind of damage to lessers. Even though this composition is a little bit low on DPS, it should still be a lot of fun, especially here at Sockeye Station. On a low tide, the enemies will funnel even more and we still have that incredible distance from the basket to the shoreline. So just like normal, try to lure them at least past the bridge, that way you're not dealing with the full flood while you're trying to collect the eggs. The range will be just a little bit rough with some of these weapons on dealing with some of those prio targets. So if you push the sides to take out a stinger and you get off that platform, make sure you get back up to the platform or to the basket as quick as possible. Be careful about stunning those lures right there by the shoreline and making it impossible for any of your teammates to get those eggs. During a glowflies occurrence, that big swig does have enough damage output to deal with the chum on this occurrence. So wherever your teammates want to stay, just make sure you put that big swig down and only move it forward whenever enemies are coming. Try to keep that ink usage as low as possible, and the less amount of moving you do gives you chances to get just a little bit of ink recovery back. Don't forget that goo tuber does have piercing damage, so you can fire right through your big swig player in order to cause some extra damage. So focus that damage, get those eggs, and if you're in a spot where you have to throw the eggs in, make sure that you are constantly throwing eggs in. We've got a bunch of areas to troll the salmonids around this area, so good luck on the glowflies. I know they're very difficult. For a griller's occurrence, that big swig can do some fantastic small fry control, and all of our weapons have some pretty good range. That way wherever you're standing, you'll be able to cause some damage to that griller and take it out pretty quickly. So hopefully grillers will be pretty smooth. On a mothership occurrence, we do have a little bit of a shorter range. So as long as we stay spread out on this map, it should be easy to take out those Chinooks on their way down. Just make sure you stay a constant flow of running eggs to the basket. Keep an eye on that basket, and make sure you keep it clear. That way when the mothership finally starts to make an approach, it's not too hectic. And remember that those dually squelchers and the goo tuber can sit up there on the tower and cause some damage on approach. During a mudmouth occurrence, we have some fun different types of weapons to keep some control on those lessers while everybody's throwing bombs. So always make sure you keep that big swig and that goo tuber ready to take out lessers and throw bombs. Try to make sure you switch in between taking out those mudmouths and taking out lessers, and mudmouth waves usually go pretty smoothly. During a Goldie Seek on Sockeye Station, if it's a regular tide, hitting the 3 valves on the shoreline will reveal its location to you. If they're all short, then it will be the one on the basket. If any of them are tall, then you know it's not going to be by the basket, and it's going to be just a little bit closer. On a high tide Goldie Seek, if any of the 3 valves by the basket are short, then it will be the one by the double platform. And if the double platform is short, then it will have to be any of those 3 by the basket. On a Quahog charge, the 52 gal and the dually squelchers have the best mobility, but just like normal, as long as 2 people stay in those turrets, keeping the area clear of Quahogs, it should be pretty easy to start running those eggs, trying to move them as a steady wave towards the basket. Utilize all the ink you have. Don't dawdle with a full tank. Start tossing those eggs whenever you get the chance. On a giant tornado, remember to throw those eggs in the most efficient way possible, getting them as close to the basket. Always remember that you can toss eggs over obstacles, over water, and over and through enemies. And try to keep that goo tuber there towards either end of the egg chain. Charge it up and use that crazy piercing damage. If you have the big swig, remember wiggling left and right as you're dealing with a horde will give you some momentum boosts, making it a little bit easier to get out of that horde before they splat you, and you can cause a little bit of extra damage on your way out. Okay, let's get into the cookware. Our first cooking utensil is the 52 gal. The 52 gal has some pretty good damage and range to it, but with that slower fire rate, it's always helpful to keep just a little bit of extra distance between you and enemies. It's even more helpful to get it up onto a platform and use its range. And as long as you can keep your aim on point, it's a fantastic weapon for taking out fish sticks and steelheads. In fact, it's a fantastic all-around weapon for dealing with just about any type of enemy. And with that slower fire rate, it makes wall painting just a little bit difficult. So if you focus your wall painting on the double or single platforms on the edges, it'll be just a little bit easier to get some good paint efficiency out of it. Our next cooking utensil is the Big Swig Roller. The Big Swig Roller can be just a little bit finicky and technical in the way that it attacks. It does have the ability to bump lessers back, and that bump works without having any ink. So even when you're rolling with this thing, if it runs out of ink, you can use it as a shield to bump some enemies away. It won't cause any damage, but it might give you just a little bit of a second to get into the ink and get just a little bit more back. Its vertical fling has some incredible range to it, so as soon as you get your ink back, use that vertical fling to get yourself an exit strategy, and then get this thing onto a platform or onto a tower. You need to make sure that you're causing as much damage with that flick as possible. Aiming above enemies also works pretty well, but allow your attack to completely open up, and this is incredibly helpful for taking out fish sticks, making it easier to take them out from a platform instead of being right on the top of it. If you do use the roll as an attack, it's always helpful to remember that rolling straight forward is almost the most inefficient way of attacking with it. Make sure that you're flicking and rolling and moving left and right or even circular motions whenever you're rolling. This allows extra damage to be caused and extra momentum to be built up too. But this can go both ways. The momentum can bump you into something that you didn't see, but it can also get you out of a sticky situation. The Big Swig can be a little bit zany, but it is a really fun weapon in Salmon Run. Our third cooking utensil are the dually squelchers. I personally really love the dually squelchers. but their damage output is pretty low for Salmon Run. One thing to keep in mind is that the dually squelchers have the best wall painting in this composition, so make sure you try to do a good focus on keeping as many walls painted at the beginning and the end of the waves. Even that little bit of extra wall painting that you do in the middle of the wave is super helpful. And with that lower DPS, it doesn't make much sense to play this weapon aggressively, but it doesn't hurt to get this weapon in to activate a Steelhead or a Slam Lid, get out, and then activate turret mode. That way you can cause some really quick damage and get that splat as quick as possible. The dually squelchers also have some pretty good ink efficiency, so keep yourself topped off and you'll find it easy to cause some damage and throw a bomb in case a Moz or a Flyfish shows up. Our last cooking utensil is the Goo Tuber. The Goo Tuber can do really good with a buff to its range or to its damage, but for the time being, we have the Goo Tuber as it is, so make sure you're charging it up and firing at least 2 blasts into large groups of enemies. It cannot splat Quahawks in a single charge, so as long as you're firing those 2 shots, it should clear the way pretty easily. So just like the dually squelchers, charge up the Goo Tuber, get it down to the level of the enemies, cause that damage. That way you can charge it back up and keep causing that damage. And the Goo Tuber's tap shot has some pretty good damage, so try not to panic too much, but just in case something gets a little bit too close, remember that those tap shots are actually pretty useful. Still, it's almost always better to get a charger up to a platform or the tower. That way you can see what's spawning in and cause that damage. And remember that your bomb throws go farther than the Goo Tuber shot. During an extra wave, we will have a problem with the amount of DPS that our composition has. We will almost certainly need some golden eggs to take down this big beast. If you have the big swig and you want to get close enough to start using some of that roll damage, remember to try to keep them there towards the tower or there by the basket. When you're rolling against him, there's a good chance that the Kohozuna will bounce you back, and having as many things to stop your momentum will help. Just always be careful about luring the Kohozuna onto one of the corners of the map. It's super easy to get tunnel vision, and you'll find yourself with a crew wipe before you can cause too much damage. Stay calm and try to make sure that there's some kind of constant damage happening to that Kohozuna. And look for that moment right towards the beginning half of the wave, where you can activate your special to not just cause some damage to the Kohozuna, but to also take out some bosses, spawning some golden eggs early on in the wave. But if you want to hold on to something like Inkjet or Crab Tank for a moment when they spawn way too many Flyfish or Stingers, I don't blame you. Just try to make sure that you're using it before the last 20 seconds of the wave. And the fish fry usually comes out before the stage rotation, so if you want to catch these updates when they're hot and fresh, make sure you subscribe and hit that bell. And if you want other fellow Grizzco employees to receive these tips, make sure you like and share the video. Bye-bye. To give the fish fry an algorithm boost, just comment what your favorite or least favorite weapon is of this composition. I'll have to give my vote with the big swig. This weapon does kind of change up the meta whenever you're using it, and it makes for some really wacky situations and some really clutch victories. So good luck on the matches, and have a great day. Bye-bye. Oh no, it's funny!
Is that funny?
when you bring your friends to the fight to
We are going to beat you to death.
Makes sense. There's only 3.